Princess Anne had spent her entire life refusing to ask for recognition. She worked, endured, and remained silent, while others inherited titles, residences, and public glory. But behind the closed doors of a private legal meeting, one sentence finally broke through decades of restraint. Prince Philip's lawyers confirmed that his most sacred private estate had not passed to the king, the crown, or a royal trust. He had left it directly to his only daughter. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne entered the private room at Windsor expecting questions about her father's papers. No one had explained why 3 lawyers were waiting, or why Philip's sealed file lay untouched. Windsor, one of the monarchy's principal residences, had hosted countless decisions, but this meeting carried no ceremony. The lead solicitor opened the file. Wood Farm Haven, Philip's secluded estate, had been transferred solely to Anne through a sealed inheritance instruction signed before his death. An inheritance instruction is a legal direction naming who receives and controls private property. The estate would not pass to Charles, the royal household, or any crown trust. Anne stared at the lawyer as though he had named the wrong person. Her hands remained folded, but her fingers pressed together until the strain showed. She asked him to read the beneficiary's name again. He did. This time, she lowered her head and released a disbelieving laugh, a sound filled with joy, grief, and years of never expecting to be chosen. The estate meant far more than land. Philip had filled his refuge with a workshop, handwritten journals, photographs, military keepsakes, and objects he had forbidden palace staff from moving. Anne understood why that mattered. Whoever controlled those rooms could preserve her father's truth or reshape it. The solicitor then revealed the restriction that changed everything. Philip had ordered Wood Farm Haven to remain outside royal household control. Charles could not reorganize its rooms, replace its staff, or remove a belonging without Anne's permission. Her father had not simply given her property. He had given her independent authority, creating a private power beyond the king's household. Anne rose, walked to the window, and fought to steady herself. When she turned back, tears had broken through the discipline she had carried for decades. "He truly chose me?" she asked. The solicitor answered yes, but his expression hardened. Another senior royal, he warned, had challenged the arrangement before Anne entered the room. But before Anne could understand why her father had chosen her, she had to discover who had expected the estate to belong to them instead. For Charles, Philip had been an imposing father, whose approval often seemed painfully distant. For Anne, he had been something different. A demanding mentor, a private ally, and the one person who never mistook her silence for weakness. Now one inheritance had exposed the emotional distance between father and son, while revealing the extraordinary bond between father and daughter. And within the royal family, that comparison was impossible to ignore. Charles received the summary alone. He read the name Wood Farm Haven, stopped, read it again. The king removed his glasses, pressed fingers against his eyes, and placed the paper face down, as though hiding the words might weaken them. An aide waited until he finally asked, "Did he explain why?" The answer was no, not in the summary. Anne understood the answer without a lawyer. She and Philip had shared discipline, blunt honesty, military respect, and a belief that duty mattered when no one applauded. The Princess Royal, a title given to the monarch's eldest daughter, had never asked her father to soften his demands. He respected that. She respected him enough never to seek sympathy when his standards cut deeply. Charles had lived beneath a different weight. As eldest son, he had been raised not merely to serve, but to inherit the throne, and every disagreement with Philip carried the pressure of succession. Their affection survived, yet it often remained trapped beneath expectation, pride, and years of sentences neither man completed. Now the estate made that private distance look like a public judgment on trust. Anne's joy began to hurt. She knew people would say Philip had trusted his daughter with what he denied his son. That thought followed her, as the caretaker of Wood Farm Haven called through a recorded estate line conversation and described the private sitting room her father had guarded from official diaries. Royal diaries are formal records of engagements and meetings, but Philip had used that room for words he never wanted reduced to palace entries. The caretaker then disclosed something more. Philip had left one inner room locked and ordered that only Anne receive its key after the inheritance was confirmed. She held the telephone tighter. The estate was no longer simply property. It contained a part of her father he had deliberately protected from the crown, the household, and perhaps even his family. Before Anne could travel there, another message quietly arrived. Camilla's household had requested an inventory weeks before the lawyers confirmed the transfer. Someone had wanted every journal, photograph, and keepsake listed before Anne crossed the threshold. And the answer began with a private family gathering that had ended in a warning no one understood until now. Years before the lawyers opened Philip's sealed instruction, one family evening had already decided the future of Wood Farm Haven. There had been no shouting, no public scandal, and no dramatic announcement. Just a dinner, an argument, and one cold moment in which Philip realized what might happen to his private world after he was gone. Those who witnessed it forgot the exact meal served that evening. None of them forgot the silence afterward. Philip had worried for years that his private belongings would be catalogued, divided, and absorbed into royal collections after his death. A royal collection is the body of art, objects, papers, and heirlooms preserved for the institution, rather than one individual. To others, that process promised order. To him, it threatened to turn a life into an inventory. Anne understood the fear before he explained it. She had told her father more than once that private history mattered because it preserved the person behind the title. Photographs should not become display pieces. Journals should not be mined for ceremony. A workshop should remain a workshop. Philip listened because she never tried to flatter him, and she never treated memory as property. The breaking point came during a family dinner at Wood Farm Haven in October 2017. A household advisor calmly proposed that the estate should become a formal royal retreat controlled by the Sovereign's office after Philip's death. The Sovereign's office is the administrative household serving the reigning monarch. Charles replied that central management would protect the grounds, secure the objects, and prevent confusion. Philip heard something else. He heard strangers deciding which rooms mattered. He heard officials preparing to move what he had ordered left untouched. The Duke set his napkin beside an untouched glass, rose without anger, and walked out. Anne saw his face harden and followed him into the corridor before the door closed. Philip stopped and looked at her. "They see rooms and land," he said. "You understand what is being kept." Anne promised that his private world would not be turned into a monument stripped of warmth. She meant comfort. He heard commitment. The next morning, Philip privately summoned his solicitor, according to the lawyer's dated meeting record, and began drafting the sealed instruction naming Anne sole inheritor and guardian. He also barred any reigning monarch, consort, or central household office from claiming automatic control. Anne later realized her promise had changed everything. Charles remembered the dinner too, and he believed her corridor conversation had guided their father's hand. For him, that distinction made Anne's inheritance personal. That old wound finally opened when brother and sister entered the same room to speak without lawyers between them. The king did not summon Anne to a throne room or surround himself with advisors. He asked to see his sister alone. That choice made the meeting more dangerous, not less. There would be no official record, no carefully prepared statement, and no courtier available to soften the words exchanged between them. When Anne entered, Charles remained standing. On the table between them lay Philip's legal instruction, and beside it, the memory of a father neither sibling had fully understood. Charles began without greeting her. He said Wood Farm Haven could not be treated like an ordinary inheritance, because its history touched the monarchy itself. The king's household, meaning the staff and offices that support the reigning sovereign, depended on clear control over important royal property. A private estate beyond that reach, he warned, could create conflict every time access, security, or ownership was questioned. Anne did not bend. She answered that the property had belonged to Philip personally, not to the crown, and that distinction mattered because private wishes could not be rewritten for institutional convenience. A crown residence is a property held for the monarchy rather than one individual. Wood Farm Haven had never been that, and her father had made the difference unmistakable. Charles finally asked the question beneath everything. Had she encouraged Philip to exclude him? Anne froze. The accusation turned loyalty into manipulation and made her joy feel almost shameful. She pushed her chair back and told him their father feared being reorganized after death by people who had not listened to him in life. The king's restraint cracked. He revealed through a documented household briefing that Camilla's office had requested the inventory because several objects were believed to belong historically to the sovereign. Anne heard the explanation, but she also heard the claim hiding inside it. If those pieces belonged to the crown, the household could enter, remove them, and weaken her control before it had fully begun. Anne opened her folder. She placed a legal ownership schedule directly over Charles's document and kept her palm pressed against it. The schedule, a formal list showing where each object came from, proved that Philip had personally purchased or inherited every disputed item. This is not rebellion, it is his final instruction. Charles looked down. His strongest argument had vanished, and humiliation settled where anger had been. Then he noticed a handwritten attachment clipped behind Anne's copy. It had not appeared in his summary. Anne saw his expression change, and neither sibling knew what would come next now. Yet the most powerful part of Philip's decision was not the name written beneath the property. It was the authority hidden in the final attachment. The palace had focused on the estate, the land, and the objects behind its locked doors. But Philip's lawyers had designed something far more significant than a simple inheritance. Buried in the final pages was a clause that separated Anne's authority from the monarch's household. It meant she could preserve the estate, appoint its staff, control access, and reject royal requests without seeking the king's approval. Philip had not merely given his daughter a home, he had given her independence. Anne studied the handwritten attachment while the lead solicitor explained what Philip had built around Wood Farm Haven. He had placed the estate inside a private protective arrangement designed to survive changes of reign and palace leadership. A protective arrangement is a legal structure that keeps property governed by fixed instructions rather than changing household wishes. No future monarch could absorb it. The solicitor then named the weight of her role. Anne was not only the sole inheritor, she was the permanent custodian responsible for the buildings, archives, furnishings, staff, and private grounds. A custodian is the person trusted to preserve and control property. Her authority would continue even when pressure came from the king's office. Anne felt no triumph. She imagined Charles reading the clause as rejection from their father, and the thought tightened around her joy. Accepting such power could deepen the wound between them and make her appear to have won a contest she had never wanted. She asked what would happen if she stepped aside. The solicitor answered from Philip's documented instructions. Refusal would trigger a secondary clause transferring Wood Farm Haven to an independent preservation foundation, not to Charles, the crown, or the royal household. Philip had anticipated Anne's instinct to sacrifice her position for family peace. He had written that surrendering the estate under emotional pressure would defeat the purpose of choosing her. Then the lawyer read the personal line aloud. Philip had selected his daughter because she could protect without displaying, preserve without possessing, and remember without rewriting. Anne's expression softened. Her father had understood not only her strength, but also the doubt that might make her abandon what he trusted her to defend. Anne took the acceptance page. She signed, paused before lifting the pen, and asked the solicitor to read Philip's sentence once more. When the words ended, she did not celebrate. She issued her first instruction: suspend every inventory, inspection, and staffing change connected to the estate until she personally approved it. That order reached Camilla's office and the king's senior household staff before the afternoon was over. And Anne's first use of that authority sent a message through the palace that no one could misunderstand. Anne did not celebrate with a banquet or issue a triumphant statement. She made 3 telephone calls, signed 1 access order, and changed the balance of power before sunset. The household inventory was cancelled, the planned inspection was withdrawn, and every key connected to Wood Farm Haven was ordered back into the hands of its private caretaker. For the first time, Charles and Camilla faced a royal door that could not be opened by the authority of the crown. Anne moved first against the inventory requested by Camilla's household. She cancelled it in writing and suspended every planned visit until she had reviewed the estate herself. An access order is a formal instruction stating who may enter a private property and under what conditions. Her message left no room for negotiation. The Princess Royal then protected the people Philip had trusted. She retained the caretaker and 2 longtime staff members who knew which rooms remained private, which objects could not be moved, and which routines had mattered to him. Central Palace employees had been proposed as replacements, but Anne rejected the change. Replacing those workers would not simply alter staffing, it would erase the human memory attached to the house. Camilla received the cancellation while preparing for an engagement. The Queen Consort held the paper, folded it once, and placed it beside her handbag. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she quietly asked whether Anne meant the order as a personal insult. Her humiliation came from more than a blocked visit. The decision proved that her household carried no automatic authority inside Philip's refuge. Charles felt the pressure immediately. He wanted to defend his wife, yet he also knew his sister was acting within indisputable legal power. The king could challenge her tone, but not her right. That distinction trapped him between loyalty to Camilla and respect for their father's final command. The returned keys deepened the danger. The caretaker's documented handover record showed one duplicate had been created during Philip's final years without his written approval. Anne ordered every lock changed and instructed the lawyers to trace who had authorized the copy. The question was no longer only who wanted an inventory. Someone may have planned to enter the private rooms before ownership was settled. Anne felt no triumph as suspicion spread. Then the lead solicitor contacted her with a discovery that altered the entire conflict. Philip had left a sealed message addressed jointly to her and Charles. Whatever it contained, neither sibling could hear it without confronting their oldest pain. But just as suspicion threatened to divide the family completely, Philip's own words forced Anne and Charles to face each other again. There were no lawyers in the room when Anne and Charles opened their father's final message. No aides stood nearby. No household official could interpret the words for them or turn grief into procedure. Brother and sister sat across from one another, with the sealed envelope placed between them. Anne broke the wax. Charles unfolded the pages. And for the first time since the inheritance was revealed, the struggle over Philip's estate became what it had always truly been: a conversation about love, regret, and trust. Charles began reading, but the first lines belonged to a world beyond rank. Philip wrote that Wood Farm Haven had been the part of his life untouched by ceremony, schedules, or public duty. Palace administration, meaning the offices that manage royal property and staff, could preserve objects while destroying their private meaning. He feared order would replace memory. Anne listened as her father's words confirmed why he had chosen her. She shared his instinct for privacy and would never turn grief into performance. Philip trusted her to protect the rooms because she understood that memory loses something when it is displayed for approval. That trust mattered, yet it no longer sounded like a judgment against Charles. The king reached the next paragraph and slowed. Philip admitted he had often failed to show affection to his eldest son, and feared that silence had been mistaken for rejection. Charles tried to continue, but his voice faltered. Anne watched her brother grip the page and finally understood. The inheritance had never declared one child more loved than another. Philip then gave his final instruction. Anne was to preserve the estate, but Charles must receive unrestricted private access whenever he wished to enter as a son rather than a monarch. Unrestricted access meant no formal permission, staff escort, or palace approval would be required. The boundary remained firm around the crown, but not around family. The final revelation changed everything. Philip identified the unexplained duplicate key as one he had secretly ordered for Charles years earlier. He had intended to give it to him, then delayed, uncertain how to speak without reopening old wounds. The key had never been evidence of intrusion. It had been an unfinished act of love. Charles stopped reading and placed the letter down. I thought he had closed the door on me. Anne slid the old key across the table. No, he was waiting for you to open it. Her joy softened into compassion, and his grief finally made room for relief. Now she had to honor them both. When the existence of the inheritance finally reached the public, one image revealed whether the family had chosen division or dignity. By morning, the inheritance had escaped the palace walls. Commentators spoke of humiliation, rivalry, and a daughter defeating a king. Headlines treated Wood Farm Haven as a prize seized in a private royal war. But the public argument changed in a single afternoon when Anne arrived at the estate, and Charles stepped from the car behind her. The photograph captured no anger, no ceremony, and no visible victory. It showed a brother and sister carrying their father's memory together. The palace confirmed the transfer through a written statement. Philip's private estate had passed to Anne under a legally binding instruction, while officials stressed that Wood Farm Haven had never belonged to the Crown Estate. The Crown Estate is the property portfolio tied to the monarchy as an institution, not the sovereign's personal belongings. That distinction mattered because it proved the transfer was private, lawful, and beyond political interference. The media still turned the moment into a contest. Some headlines described Charles as the rejected son. Others praised Anne as the only royal strong enough to protect Philip's final wishes. Her growing moral authority became the center of debate because she had defended memory without demanding public credit. Yet the celebratory tone troubled her. Victory over her brother was never the legacy she wanted. Anne arrived first and paused at the iron gate. Charles followed several steps behind, carrying the old duplicate key. She looked back and waited until he reached her before crossing the threshold. That single pause destroyed the image of a sister triumphing over a wounded king. She had inherited the house, but she refused to enter it without him. The London Chronicle captured the moment on its front page. Beneath the photograph, the fictional newspaper printed the headline, "She inherited the house, but she gave her brother the key." Hours later, a broadcaster revealed through a documented palace briefing that Anne had personally requested Charles's presence and rejected advice to make her first visit alone. The crowd outside understood before the commentators did. When Anne and Charles emerged together, applause rose from behind the barriers. She briefly touched his arm before they entered the waiting car, and he lowered his head in quiet gratitude. The gesture mattered because it showed that Philip's decision had created responsibility, not revenge. The photograph silenced the ugliest rumors, but it also placed one final burden before Anne. She now had to decide whether Wood Farm Haven would remain a private refuge, become a family sanctuary, or turn into something larger than Philip had intended. The estate had been inherited, the conflict had been confronted, and only one final question remained: what Anne would choose to do with the trust her father placed in her. Anne entered Wood Farm Haven as its legal owner, but she refused to behave like a victor. She walked through Philip's workshop, touched the back of his worn chair, and stood silently before the shelves he had arranged by hand. Everything around her confirmed that he had chosen correctly. Yet the true meaning of the inheritance was not found in the property's value, its privacy, or even its hidden rooms. It was revealed by what Anne decided to protect and what she chose to share. Anne decided without ceremony. Wood Farm Haven would remain a family estate, preserved as Philip left it. No commercial tours would enter. No ceremonial redesign would erase his habits. No palace department would absorb the rooms into royal control. She refused to let memory be consumed by the institution. The Princess Royal then created a preservation trust chaired by herself. A preservation trust is a legal body protecting property and its contents for one purpose. She appointed an independent archivist and retained Philip's longtime caretaker, allowing judgment and memory to guide every decision. Charles received what his father had intended. He could visit privately, without staff, cameras, schedules, or the pressure of arriving as king. Inside the workshop, Anne placed the duplicate key in his hand and told him it belonged to him, not as sovereign, but as their father's son. He closed his fingers around it, and understood that access was not ownership. Camilla's household accepted Anne's authority through a formal written withdrawal. The Queen Consort's office cancelled all requests and ended the confrontation without further humiliation. Her decision mattered because peace required the palace to stop treating Philip's privacy as available for administrative claim. Anne kept the journals sealed from public release. Yet she preserved one personal note in which Philip described her as the child who understood that duty meant guarding what others could not see. Alone before leaving, she straightened one of his tools, rested her hand on the table, and whispered a quiet "thank you." Anne rejoiced not because she had received more than Charles, but because her father had entrusted her with the responsibility that reflected who she had always been. He found peace instead of defeat, and the monarchy emerged stronger because memory had been respected rather than consumed by power. And so Philip's most sacred estate did not become the prize that divided his children. It became the final gift that allowed them to understand him, forgive one another, and preserve the part of their father that the crown could never own. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.